Hi, is this Jordan?
Hey, this is Jordan. How you doing?
Hi, this is Morgan.
Hey, Morgan. How's it going?
All right. Yeah,
Good.
so you're able to do the interview now?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect.
Great. Okay, so first of all, were you involved in traditional broadcasting in any form before you got into podcasting, like terrestrial radio?
The only way when I was a kid, I had like a minor part in a TV show on YTV, but I was never never went to school for broadcasting and never pursued it as a job or career or anything at all.
What inspired you to start your podcast?
Well, it was I got into the medium of podcasting more as a listener. I had a baby boy born in 2012, and the baby wasn't sleeping good, so we did a lot of walking around the neighborhood, and I just kind of started listening to a lot of different podcasts, and I always liked radio, so I like podcasting. Just kind of was a natural progression, and there was so much to listen to. I just got right into all the different shows, and then when I had a kind of a topic that I wanted to pursue in some way myself, which was my grandfather's UFO sighting, I decided to just make an episode. My plan initially was to make a podcast episode and maybe try to get another podcast to release it as an episode of their show, but I didn't do that when I made it. It was just a bit too personal, so I just released it on my own. People listened, and so I made another one, and here I am now, I guess, 3 years later. And
as a listener, what do you find that podcasting has to offer that you don't typically find in terrestrial radio?
I think it's a mix of things. For one, the specialization. With podcasting, there's so many different podcasts made by different people about different topics. You can kind of pick, the most fringiest, unique topic, and you'll find somebody who's, completely obsessed with it as well, and making a podcast about it. So you can kind of, find anything on there. Also, with podcasting, so many of the creators are doing it as a passion rather than a career, and because of that, the content is so sincere. So, for example, if I was into, whichever bizarre television show that hardly anybody watches, you would never hear it on traditional radio, but I could probably find 10 different podcasts about it, 5 of which are probably made by people that are so obsessed that it's just, it's such a unique glance at the topic. So there's that. And then it's almost like to me, it's sort of like a renaissance of radio. It's just almost like the golden age of radio, except it's, podcasting. It's free. You can take it with you wherever you go, and you don't need much more than the phone you're carrying in your pocket anyway. So I guess that's kind of it with me.
Speaking of radio, do you think podcasting will one day become competitive with terrestrial and satellite radio to the extent that it may surpass those mediums in popularity and profitability?
I absolutely do. I think it's happening fast, and I think the major players in radio already know that. One only needs to look as far as the podcast charts. If you looked at the Apple podcast charts 5 years ago, it was almost entirely people like myself, just random people kind of making their own shows out of their spare bedrooms and releasing them. Then over the years, as podcasting grew, the major players, TV networks, radio stations, are investing in their own shows, and those are kind of becoming some of the major shows. And I think radio is just looking for ways to take advantage of the media, ways to get on there and invest in it, because I think they know it's taken over. People, like I said, people have a cell phone in their pocket. It's so easy for them to tune into a podcast, but very few people can take that cell phone out of their pocket and connect to the radio and with it in some way. And in fact, I'm probably, my own show, Nighttime, is probably a good example of a podcast who, as a way to show kind of radio's interest, where my podcast is homemade. I do it off my laptop in a spare bedroom at night while my kids are asleep, and I didn't go to school for broadcasting, and and a lot of the topics I cover unique things that terrestrial radio normally wouldn't be too into. But over time, as I've grown the show, it's at a point now where Chorus, who's a major Canadian, I don't know, they own a bunch of radio stations and TV stations, they have expressed an interest in my show, and now they broadcast my show on radio across Canada. I'm one of the first independent podcasters who've had their show syndicated nationally, and I think that's just, again, radio trying to find ways to get involved in podcasting.
Remarks that have been made by public figures in podcasts have been reported in mainstream media and even led to the downfall of people like Milo Yiannopoulos, who appear to have underestimated the reach of podcasts. Do you think there will be more incidents of that kind in the future?
Yeah, I would think so. There was also very recently Elon Musk, who was on a podcast. He was on the Joe Rogan Experience,
Same
which is
show, yeah,
and a huge show. He smoked marijuana on the show and talked very loosely about Elon Musk did about his company, and that led to, I think, it affected his the stock for the stock prices for his company for a while there. But anyway, I think so. I think it'll continue to happen until podcasting gets bigger, because podcasting is still kind of fringy and unique enough that someone who's not into it, maybe Elon Musk isn't, I don't know, but somebody who's not as into podcasting may not realize the reach and the permanence of what you say on a podcast. Just like, because what you say on a podcast, it's just like you wrote it on an internet message board. It's there for the world to see forever, basically. So, yeah, I think it's something that's going to continue to happen until podcasting becomes as big as radio. Because, again, Elon Musk, I don't think he would have said the stuff he said on Joe Rogan's podcast. I don't think he would have said that on a late night television or a major radio station.
Yeah, what kind of podcast do you tend to gravitate towards as a listener?
For me, it's I kind of like a little bit of everything. I like things that are sincere and genuine. So I like a show that's made by someone who's really passionate about the topic. As far as topics, I like shows about true crime, mysteries, paranormal stories, very similar topics to what I get into on nighttime. But yeah, that's really it. I just like something sincere and unique, and something that when I'm listening to it, it kind of takes me to another place that isn't an office job or the bureaucratic stuff like mortgages and car payments. Mm-hmm. So I kind of treat podcasts like a bit of an escape.
And is there one particular podcast that you never miss that you would consider your favorite?
I have so many. I have my podcast playlist would be, I probably have 10 or 15 that I really enjoy, but I guess one the one I would say it's actually a podcast that doesn't exist anymore. It was called Mysterious Topics, and it was the podcast that really got me into, made me feel like I could make my own podcast. And Mysterious Topics really was just these two guys. One was a retired postal worker, and the other was his still working friend who was a mailman. So two postal workers, just like myself, no background in broadcasting. And basically what they did was, when one of the pair retired from the postal service, they decided to start a podcast to stay in touch and continue their friendship. And each episode they did 2 episodes a week, and each episode was discussing a different mysterious or unique topic from around the world. So it was kind of similar in format to mine, except it was 2 guys and they just kind of talk about it. But that was one where the sincerity and the interest and passion these 2 hosts had was unparalleled with anything you'd hear on radio or TV. So I think that overall I would say was my favorite podcast ever. And again, that was kind of what made me think I could make a podcast to do this.
There's currently little to no censorship on podcasts since it's distributed by the internet. It's very much the Wild West. In some cases, though, the dark side emerges where you have like white supremacists who have appeared on podcasts and hosted podcasts. So do you feel some censorship should be introduced, or do you feel it should be left wide open?
Oh, sorry, you cut out a little bit there. Could you repeat the end of the question?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So there's no censorship in podcasts right now since it's based on the internet, and so it's like the Wild West. So it does mean that there's a dark side where white supremacists can appear on podcasts or they can host podcasts. Do you feel that there should be some censorship, or should it remain completely open?
Oh. Yeah, that's a good question. You know, when you talk about like someone like a white supremacist having a venue to share their ideals and possibly, you know, recruit and plan activities and stuff like that. Of course, I disagree that should be able to happen, and feel there should be something done to prevent, you know, whether you want to say like white supremacists or religious extremists or something. But at the same time, you need to balance protecting people from, you need to balance that with stopping creative expression in other cases. So it's, yeah, I don't know. A part of me would really like to say, no, I don't think there should be any censorship, and it should be the Wild West. But just even with what you said with, you know, white supremacists hosting shows, and again, my mind goes to terrorism and religious extremists and people who are looking to create problems for the, you know, society. Something needs to be done to stop that. So I think it should be censored. They should be censored in the same way the internet broadly is. Hate speech should be illegal, and there should be no place for it, whether it's on a podcast or on Reddit or standing outside the mall holding up a big sign. That's kind of what I think. So I don't think the censorship should be anything like what you see on television or radio, but there needs to be something to prevent crime. Mm-hmm.
And all things being equal, if you had a choice between podcasting and a show on terrestrial radio, you know, if in terms of you know, making the same amount of money and reaching the same amount of people, which one would you choose?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch the end of that sentence. If I had a choice between a podcast and a show on terrestrial radio, which would I prefer?
Yeah, if all things being equal, say you could make an equal amount of money from both of them, and the audience was the same size, but you had the luxury of choosing between them, which one would you go with, a podcast or a terrestrial radio show?
Oh, for me, podcast, absolutely. It's and it's just a personal opinion, mainly because for me the podcast isn't a way to make money. It's a hobby, and any advertising I get is purely just to pay bills and to make it so that I can spend so much time doing this. TV show, to host a television show would involve much more like travel and scheduling and, you know, looking your best and all these various things that I don't want to do. For me, like even the name of my show, it's called the Nighttime Podcast, and the reason for that is not because people probably think I name it that because the nighttime is creepy in some of my some of my topics maybe, but really it's called Nighttime because the only time I have to do it is at the nighttime when my family's asleep and I have an hour of free time to work on it. So the name originally was like Jordan's Nighttime Podcast because it's what I do at the nighttime. And also the reason, like, I would love to have a co-host or something. The reason it's just me is because my schedule is so sporadic that I could never subject someone else to my schedule. If I have a half hour, maybe I'm going to sit and do my podcast, but it's not something I could plan. So I think for me, the medium of podcasting it's a growing industry, we'll say. It's exciting. It's in a lot of ways the Wild West. There's a lot of passionate people. It's not completely run by marketing and money and all this kind of stuff that, you know, TV maybe. So I would choose podcasting hands down. If I was doing it as a job or something, maybe it'd be a different story.
And there are a lot of challenges that you can face in terms of building a podcast audience. There's all the different avenues of promotion now, like there's social media, there's blogging, and what challenges did you face in terms of raising awareness about your podcast?
It's for one, I think we're podcasting, like it's kind of a double-edged sword. Anybody can do it. It doesn't take much more than a microphone or even a cell phone. You can do it. But because of that, to a lot of people, podcasting can have a bad name. It can be. Some people may think of a podcast as a couple people, very amateur, that sounds bad, they're fumbling over their words, they're getting facts wrong, the quality's terrible. So all these kind of things are the public perception of a lot of podcasts. So when you're a new show breaking in, it's really hard to encourage someone to give your podcast a listen and give it a chance, especially so when you're simply just learning to do it. So when you're making your first episodes, they're probably going to be some of your worst episodes, but also they're going to be the ones that are kind of the carpet you're rolling out for new listeners. So I think the challenge at the beginning was just making the show as good as it could be, and trying to find ways to encourage people to give it a chance. So really trying to make the artwork look the best, the topics be, something that would be unique. Like a lot of podcasts kind of will cover the same topics, especially if you're thinking like true crime podcasts, which is a very big genre of podcasts, but a lot of people cover the same cases. And because of that, it's, if I was a new show and my first episode was about, a very famous case, why would somebody, give my show a chance? So I thought at the beginning it was just all about making the show look the best, sound the best, knowing that, it was kind of the first impression for a lot of listeners, but also finding topics that were unique and something that someone would see in a Twitter post or a Facebook post and be like, whoa, I got to check that out. So that was kind of the challenges at the beginning, and still is even as I'm growing.
Well, I thank you very much for doing the interview, and
this is fantastic.
Yeah, I was just listening to the Alan Legier episodes. It's funny because I lived in Moncton at the time that he was on the run, so that brought back a lot of memories. So.
Yeah, that's a very dark story, and just like going back to your last question there, that's an example. Like when I did that Alan Legier two-parter, I did that. Probably that was one of my earlier episodes, and that was one where, when I did that, I don't know if any other podcast would have covered his story. So if you were scrolling through Facebook or Twitter and saw that I did that story, you would think, oh, cool, like this is someone who covered a story from my small town. So that was kind of one where, when I released that, probably a lot of people from that region had checked out my show for the first time. So I kind of been fortunate to get in before a lot of other podcasters had, because it's a story like that nowadays, even after 4 or 5, for however many years it's been since I released that episode, it's probably been covered quite a bit more now.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, but this is fantastic. I appreciate you thinking of me, and anytime you ever need something like this, you let me know. I'd be happy to chat.
Yeah, thank you very much for doing the interview.
No problem. You have a great night.
Yeah, you take care, man.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.